Hey everybody, so welcome to my channel. Now today I want to talk about a subject that's very interesting to me, which is risk. You know, risk is like this invisible force that's guiding some of our decisions, stopping us make others. Quite often we just run on automatic and allow decisions to be made for us. But do we really stop and think about what risk is? What's the definition of risk? Why is it something we're so bad at making decisions? And what are the tools and methods out there that can help us both from a business perspective and also in life in general? Okay, so what's risk? Well, you know, every action we take, every objective we want to meet has risk attached to it. You can't have one without the other. And the way that I look at risk is really, it's two components put together. The first component is the bad event that could happen, such as slipping on a banana peel. The other is, what's the chances of that bad event occurring? Now, quite often, we subconsciously make decisions on risk all the time. We don't think about in detail the risks we're taking when we go out the door or we drive our car. But subconsciously, our brains are constantly trying to do risk assessments. And sometimes we're like an ostrich, sticking our head in the sand, trying to ignore risks that are out there or misunderstanding risks. So why is it that we can be so bad at judging risk? Well, that's because we share the risk process with a primitive version of ourselves that sometimes can have a really loud voice. So let's do a thought experiment to understand better what I mean. So let's go back 50,000 years to a primitive person foraging in the forest looking for fruit. And suddenly, there you are, you see this beautiful fruit tree. You start to walk towards it, but all of a sudden you're filled with dread and fear. And you've got this compelling urge to go and hide. You don't quite know why or what's going on, but you go and hide. And as you're collecting yourself, you see in a bush, close to the fruit tree, a tail. It was a lion. Without even realizing it, you just stop yourself being lunch with the lion. Now let's take this primitive version of ourselves and transport ourselves back to modern day, but now we're in an airport, waiting for the plane. And we're a business person. And we're about to take a plane to do an amazing deal with a client. But you know what? We don't like flying so much. We saw some films or some other things and we just put us off. So as we're waiting there, we hear the announcement to board the plane. But as we do that and we realize we're going to get on the plane, all of a sudden the terrible fear overcomes us. We don't know what's going on, but we have this urge to get out. And before we know where we are, we're calling a cab and we're on our way home. We call up the company and apologize, but they don't want any of it. We couldn't make the commitment to take a safe flight. Now, I'm not quite finished yet with my thought experiments. I like thought experiments. And I want to do one more related to primitive man and some of the issues that we can face with risk. So this time, we're in the room and we have a plank, just a standard plank. And I put the plank just at waist height above the ground. And I ask you to walk across the plank. So now what I do is I take my plank and I transport it on two tall buildings. And so I say to you now, walk across the plank. Now there's no wind, it's exactly the same exercise, no difference. But now imagine what would happen to most people. Fear would come over you. Now imagine instead I also say to you, hey, I'll give you $1 million if you walk across that plank. Now, in this case, maybe you could crawl across it. Maybe you'd be edging your bets. Can you do it? Can you not do it? But in this case, what would happen is fear would come over you. Now, primitive man has taken over. Now, one thing I want to come out of this discussion is the thing of risk takers. Quite often when we talk about risk takers, it's people who are kind of able to cope with that kind of consequence. Maybe the action is not so difficult or reasonable or possible, but the consequences are so great we freeze. Like in the case, these people can walk across the plank relatively easily, whereas others would maybe crawling across or just can't do it. And that's kind of what I look at successful risk takers, are those people who can control primitive person, put them in a box, and able to take those risks, or what I would call the hazard. Maybe the chances are not so terrible. Okay, so when it comes to tools and methods, there are a lot of them, but they all have some things in common. And those things in common is they're trying to get the primitive person out of the discussion on risk judgment, should I say. And the things they have in common is they tackle both the hazard and they tackle both the chances. And they look at formalized methods to manage both. So let me give you an example of what I mean. So you, for example, in terms of hazards, you may ask for experts to formalize better the hazards. You may try and use a system that helps you understand hazards you haven't even thought of yet. Then on the chances side, you might use probability, models and methods and statistics to help you really quantify those two. So then you have a real tangible data-driven approach to understanding risk. And what can you do with that? Well, let's use an example if we did that. So let's imagine the example of our plank 100 meters in the air. So one way that we could mitigate that risk would be, let's put a net under the plank. So if you fall in the net. So we've reduced the hazard. The chances are the same. Although you would argue in that case the chances are reduced because you're not nervous. On the other side, you might say, okay, we can't put a net, but let's make the plank really wide. Or let's put up some kind of fence or barriers on either side of the plank to reduce the chances that you could fail. And these are the things that these tools all have in common. They use data-driven best practices to help identify the hazards, identify the chance, and I'm not using probability, I'm using chance here in this case, because I think that's a better overall term. And from that then, you're able to make decisions on whether you can avoid it, whether you can reduce it, whether you can even transfer it. In other words, maybe you get insurance or something along those lines. And that's the kind of basic idea of the tools. Now in the next videos, I'm going to start to take some of these actual tools and we'll go into some of the details. We'll have a look at the ISO documents involved in this, and we'll look at some of the common project management methods, maybe even look at some of the engineering methods that are really helping us to manage risk. So thanks for watching, and subscribe if you're interested in some of the other videos that are coming on risk. So thanks again.